Hey, you guys, welcome to this week's edition of the Pantry Chat Food for Thought. This week, I am going to be sharing with you my special preserving secret. And when I say secret, I mean it's kind of a secret. It's a secret weapon that I use for preserving. And it's one that people don't talk a lot about, but I think it's something that's really, really overlooked in the preserving world as we're all learning how to go from this idea of like growing more food, providing more of our own food, and then preserving our food, filling our pantries so that we have this great source of food for our families, regardless what happens. We also need to look at the historical record to see how did people actually live this way and make it practical. Make it so that you're not going crazy working all the time and forgetting how to actually have the relationship side of the life that we love. And so that is actually what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm going to give you the lesson that I learned from history that actually is potentially going to save you a lot of time preserving. But first, before we get started, let's thank today's sponsor of the Pantry Chat. And today's sponsor is ForJars. Thank you, ForJars, for making this Pantry Chat happen, making it doable. ForJars emphasizes the lifestyle of preparedness and self-reliance, ensuring that families are well equipped for future needs of food preparation. They have a line of vacuum sealers that work great for freeze-dried foods and many other projects that you need to vacuum seal. Vacuum sealing can be a great way to save all sorts of things, from your dry herbs to the food that you have freeze-dried to the food you've dehydrated, but it can also be a great way to extend the shelf life of food that you're keeping fresh in the refrigerator. So it's a great thing to be looking for. Right now, ForJars is offering a 10% off coupon for your first order. That's if you use the code Homesteading Family 10. Homesteading Family 10, the numbers 10 right there at the end. So thanks again, ForJars, for sponsoring today's Pantry Chat. Okay, so let's talk about a question of the day. I thought this was a really great one. Somebody asked, I was told that raw honey loses its benefits after you mix it with a hot drink. Is this true? So I think this is a great question because it's one of those places where sometimes we end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Raw honey has a lot of properties to it. And only some of them, a lot of medicinal properties, I should say, only some of them are wrapped up in the raw part of raw honey. Just honey alone has a lot of really great properties to it, even if it's not raw. But of course, raw honey brings in some added things into it. It's got enzymes in it that are really rich, some organic compounds that are really good. Of course, it has beneficial bacteria. It has lots of really good stuff in it when it's raw. So when you take that raw honey and you put it into a hot drink, let's think a hot cup of tea. Well, how hot is a hot cup of tea? So let's say you just boiled the kettle and maybe you cool it for a moment or two, and then you pour that water into your cup over your herbs, and then you spoon in some honey. Well, by the time your honey gets in there, you might be talking 200 degrees hot. Maybe you're talking 180 degrees hot. Both of those temperatures are hot enough to sterilize any of the living components in the raw honey. So essentially what it means is it won't be raw anymore. Okay, it's getting pasteurized really quickly in that process. So yes, you will lose the benefits of the raw benefits of the honey. But what you don't lose are the other medicinal benefits of honey, which, number one, the way we usually use it is for its very soothing quality on a throat or upper respiratory tract. So it is still going to do that even if you add it to that really hot cup of tea. Now, if you want to preserve that those raw benefits of that honey, what you need to do is just let your tea cool a little bit more. I like to let it get under about 120 degrees. Usually you're not drinking it at 120 degrees anyways. That's still pretty warm. So let it cool down just a little bit. Obviously, that means you're going to have a cooler cup of tea by the time you're drinking it, but it does help retain those good raw qualities of your honey. Great question. Thank you. Thank you. So, okay, quick update for the homestead here. We are struggling with a hot, dry start to the summer, even for here up in North Idaho. I don't know what's going on in your guys' part of the country, but up here, it got hot fast as soon as we got into June, and it's been staying pretty warm. By the time we're filming this, we've still been up in the 90s. So it's been a warm season. That, of course, means there's a lot of extra stress on the plants. And it means we're dealing with keeping everything watered and cooled down, whether it's the livestock or the plants. We're just going through water really quickly. So we're having to pay a lot more attention to the water circumstance. Hopefully we're going to get a little bit of a break in the heat, and maybe we'll even get some rain. That would be wonderful to help kind of cool things down and freshen things up. But right now we're looking at a hot, dry summer. That always means in the West that we have concerns about fire danger. And so making sure that we're paying attention to what's going on around us with fire is always really important. Thankfully, the property right next door to us was nicely selectively logged this last year, which is good because it was a very, very dense forest, very overgrown. And it would have definitely been a problem in a fire year if we were facing fire. So we're thankful for a little bit more clearing, a little bit more room around us. We're also thankful for lots of water storage on the property. So that's kind of what we're facing this year. Another big thing that's happening on the homestead right now is we are packing up and we are getting ready to head to the Modern Homesteading Conference. That's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. That's just a couple hours from us. And we are so excited to be there with you guys this year. We're not speaking this year. It's, our break year. We're trying to take a slower year this year. And so we said that we're not speaking at any events, but we are going to show up. We are going to be there. We're going to be hanging out to get to talk to all of you guys. So please come to see us. Come say hi. We love getting to shake your hands, get hugs, and see your faces. So please come see us there at the Modern Homesteading Conference. If you already have tickets, I can't wait to see you. If you don't, I'll try to make sure to get the link to you guys in the show notes so that you can come check it out. Okay, so I want to jump right into this main topic because it's going to be a little bit of a different topic for me, maybe. There's a really fine balance. All of these things that we are learning how to do, we're doing all of these skills. We're kind of resuscitating all of these skills that are historical skills, from growing food, maybe some learning how to do some cottage industries from our home, preserving food, from scratch, cooking, raising animals in a way that's sustainable. All of these different things, like, I guess in general, just living a more home-centered life, which to me really embodies the whole thing. Like living a life where we're all present at home, working together, existing together, and taking care of more of our own needs by providing together with our households and our families. There's a really fine line between doing all those things, learning all the skills, and getting yourself really overwhelmed with trying to practice all of the skills. Food preservation is one of those things where, it's amazing. You've gone to all the work to either grow all that great food or source all the food. And now you're faced with what can potentially be weeks in the kitchen of preserving that food. We want to have fun during the summer too. I don't know about you, but standing over the stove is not my favorite thing to do. I love my freeze dryer. It has saved me tons and tons of time with food preservation. But even that requires me to make sure things are chopped, to make sure I'm paying attention to things, to make sure I'm watching them. And when I started thinking about the historical record and all of the different farm manuals, household manuals, everything that I've read from yesteryear, there's a lot of them out there and they're really fun to read. One of the things that really stood out to me is that, yes, food preservation happened, but it kind of happened as a matter of course. Like, life was busy then too, maybe even more so because they didn't have all of the modern conveniences that we had. I do feel like there were fewer expectations of people to be everywhere and to be doing everything. But, even back then, life was full. You had to work hard. You had to get things done. And you didn't have time just to stand in the kitchen for hours and hours and hours on end. And so I started asking myself, so what did people do to make it work? What did people with large families do? How did they put up enough food to reliably feed their families without just spending their entire life in the kitchen? And some of the things that I found really made me rethink some of the ways that I was approaching food preservation. So let me tell you right now, the number one preserving hack that most people aren't talking about is to not preserve as much food. Okay, that's going to sound totally counterintuitive because here I am sitting in my kitchen with jars of food all around me. I've got a pantry filled with food. Of course, I teach you how to preserve food, and I fully believe that everybody should. But here's the thing. You only need to preserve as much food as you need to preserve to get through the lean times. Okay, sometimes we get in this modern mindset as we're trying to make these changes of like, I just need more. I need more. And I think there's a question of when is more enough? When do we have enough? When are we just doing more work that's not necessary? And I think this is something that's really important to think about. You've learned the skills. You've worked hard trying to learn how to can safely. You've tried to learn how to dehydrate, maybe freeze dry, maybe ferment. And those shelves are starting to fill up. But how much food do you actually need? So as I look at the historical record, I see a few things that really are keys for me and are starting to shift the way that I'm preserving now. First key, extending the harvest in your garden. This is really important. Every day that you're eating out of your garden is a day that you don't have to eat your preserved food. It's a day that you don't have to depend on the food that is in your pantry or in, whatever it is you're calling your makeshift root cellar. It's a day that you are getting fresh food instead. And so taking some of the time that we're spending on food preservation and instead shifting our focus to extending our fresh harvest is an amazing way to start saving a lot of time and energy on food preservation. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want any preserved foods, but it does mean that you might need quite a bit less. So let's look at that. Let's say this year, here we are in June, you probably have plenty of time. I still have time in far north Idaho with my short growing season. So wherever you are, you probably still have plenty of time to think about putting in a fall garden bed where you're growing things that can handle a little bit of frost, maybe even a lot of frost, and you can go harvest it straight out of your garden right before dinner and eat it even when you're back into frost season. So these are things that would be like peas, brassicas, cabbages, let's see, broccolis, cauliflowers, things like that can stand in the garden. Also things like kales, depending on how cold you get in your area, chard. A lot of lettuces, if they're grown to full size, will stand in your garden. they may not grow very much. In fact, most things won't grow very much once you get back to cold weather, but they will stand there and wait just to be picked fresh. Lettuces will definitely do that. A lot of your different greens will do that. Spinaches can do that. Chards can do that. Definitely kales. Some of the mustards will do that. Tatsoys, bok choys, the list kind of goes on and on. You also have things like fall root crops, carrots, beets, different things like that, rutabagas and turnips. All those things can be out in your garden and they will last until you have a really hard freeze. Some of the plants can go down without any protection down to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. That's really cold, you guys. Most of the country, most of us live in places where we're not often struggling below about 10 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you live in one of those areas, there is a potential that you could be growing year round in your area and have to do very, very little food preservation. Wouldn't that be amazing? I think for me, that would be an amazing thing. Now, that's not going to happen for me. We get down into, sometimes we'll see negative 30 degrees. I have yet to find a plant that's going to be harvestable after that. And we're usually covered in a couple feet of snow, but it does mean that many years I can be harvesting things right through mid-December. Now, spring is, of course, the other side of season extension, getting your plants harvestable earlier in the spring so that you're not depending on those preserved foods as far into your spring season. And, that's another great thing to look at. A lot of the same vegetables do really well in early season. You have to use a little bit of a different technique. So we're going to save that for a different conversation. But looking at extending out your garden season is probably one of the most practical ways to reduce your work when it comes to food preservation. Okay. Method number 2 to just not preserve food is to switching to eating seasonally. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand in extending your season because, what we often do in our food preservation is we kind of get in this habit of trying to mimic the grocery store. We're trying to have everything available all of the time. We want that tomato sauce every month of the year. Maybe, we want those fresh tasting berries or the fruit snacks or, all these different things every single month of the year. And what that ends up doing is creating a lot of work on the food preservation side. If we shift to a focus on seasonal eating, that actually takes a lot of pressure off the food preservation. What that means is that all of a sudden, instead of saying, well, I need to put up all these summer things for the winter things, instead we can shift the conversation and say, what naturally stores itself really well? What is a winter food in my area? And different areas of the country are going to have different answers. In my area, it has to be something that I don't have to go outside to harvest, right? I already talked about, we have frozen ground, we have feet of snow. Sometimes it's frigidly cold. We're not going to be harvesting anything out of the ground in our area, but there are a lot of foods that absolutely preserve themselves without any work. Root vegetables are one of them. I can harvest a winter's worth of root vegetables with the kids in probably about 2 hours and have them all preserved just by packing them down into some sawdust and putting them in the coolest part of our basement. That right there, which is not very cool, by the way. In the winter, it's usually down in the mid 60s. So we're not talking root cellar cool. We're just talking cool area of the house. And by doing that, I've reduced a huge amount of the work that would be needed to replace those calories with summer type foods. I have shortcutted that probably by weeks for our household. Now, we're often feeding about 15 people a meal, so we need a lot of food. But imagine what it would take for you to pack down all of the root veggies. And we're talking carrots, parsnips, beets, we're talking turnips, rutabagas, potatoes, all of those things pretty much store themselves. Right alongside of that, you have things like cabbages that can go a really, really long time, pretty much just storing itself. Let's talk about another favorite though, and that is winter squash. Winter squash is another thing. It practically stores itself. All you have to do is get it off the vine, get it in a place where it can sit and cure for a little bit, and then it's just waiting for you to be ready to eat it. So think about your food preservation as that's kind of your baseline. That's that emergency food preservation. If you were like, hey, I know there's not going to be any food available for my family this fall. I need to grow it all. These are the crops that I would be growing to make sure that I had the calories that my family needed to survive. Plus, it would free up my time because I wouldn't be busy preserving. Now, usually we want a little bit more variety to our diets than just root vegetables and winter squash. So that's where your food preservation comes in. That's where you augment with some of the other vegetables to give yourself some variety in the diet. But choosing to eat seasonally and then to really focus on understanding what winter seasonal eating looks like in your area of the country, that's going to take your food preservation down from massively overwhelming, trying to get it all done, having buckets of tomatoes going bad on your counter while you're trying to, plus think of all the work that goes into growing all of those foods that then you have to preserve, to instead thinking about, what does winter seasonal eating look like where I live? Do I need to preserve a lot of food, or can food just stand out in my garden all winter long and I can just go harvest it? Maybe stashing some aside for lean times or for rough times. This is a question I think we should all be asking. We're kind of coming out of the new, maybe honeymoon phase of homesteading, where it's like, let's just do it all. And realizing, if we're going to live this way and not burn out, if we're going to see ourselves doing this year after year for decades on end, and making it so practical and enjoyable and reasonable that our children want to follow in our footsteps and have that same lifestyle, then we need to move out of this idea that we're just putting everything that the grocery store has into our pantry, or that we're trying to replicate that grocery store. And instead, really think about, what does it look like for me? What does it look like for my family? And what are things that I just don't need to have stashed? Then, for all those extra goodies that you want to round out your diet, then you start looking at, what are the things that you just love having? What are the things that are really easy to fit into your schedule to preserve because you enjoy the process, or it's really easy? For me, fermented foods goes right up to the top of that. Fermented foods adds all of those great fresh vitamins in, all the enzymes that you're missing in some of those other more preserved foods. And it just really helps to carry you through the winter. Plus, it's fast and it's easy and it's really simple to get started with. Another thing that, of course, I love is my freeze dryer. I love freeze drying food. It's just so easy. You can see, those of you guys who are watching on video, I have a big batch of rhubarb that we've just sliced and freeze dried. It took us a few minutes to do. And we love getting to throw those into oatmeals or different baked goods all winter long. Turning the script a little bit, thinking about food preservation from a different angle. What if the number one food preservation hack really is to just not preserve it in the first place? I think it's a question that we need to be asking. And I think it's something that we all need to lean into a little bit over these next seasons. Certainly, if you're homesteading predominantly because you're concerned about the future, finding ways to preserve food that is really practical on the energy side is going to be your best friend. But that's just what makes it doable for everybody. And historically, that's what we see people doing. Yes, maybe they didn't can a bunch of food because they didn't have pressure canners, or they didn't have that, or they didn't have the other, they certainly didn't have freeze dryers or electric dehydrators. But we do see them putting up enough food anyways to get their families through really lean times through winter. And a lot of times they did that by focusing on the foods that were their winter foods in their areas and foods that really naturally preserve themselves. Okay, you guys. So don't throw any tomatoes at me for saying maybe we should preserve less, because I know, this just isn't a topic that a lot of people talk about, but think about it. I would love your thoughts about this topic. Please share them with me. You can always go ahead and put them in the description below the YouTube video version of this podcast. And hey, you guys, I would love your feedback. We're looking at some changes here in the Pantry Chat. We're looking at shaking things up a little bit and changing things. And so I would love to hear from you guys. What would you like to see on the Pantry Chat? What topics would you like us to cover? What things are you not interested in? Do you like the interviews, or do you prefer the topics that Josh and I cover together? Do you like the solo episodes where I do them all by myself? Let me know your thoughts. You can always email us at Josh and Carolyn at homesteadingfamily.com, or you can go to the website and there'll be a link for you to email us there. So that's homesteadingfamily.com. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today, and have a great week. We'll see you real soon. Goodbye.